perfect excuse for me to transition into what I wanted to talk about next, which is getting back to consciousness, but more particularly with regard to animal minds. The reason that I find this interesting right now is another dietary arc of mine is I am concerned, at least in a way that is spurring me to act on my concerns for animal well-being that I didn't have before. And for me, the first consideration in thinking about this is, are animals conscious? What does it mean for an animal to be conscious? And are they capable of suffering? And maybe the first thing I ought to ask you is, do you at all find that science should be helpful in questions that are conventionally moral in this case? Because Michael Graziano, for instance, didn't feel this way. He thought science would be of no help here, that if it makes you feel bad to eat shrimp or something, you just shouldn't eat them. Whereas for me, I think I feel bad about it because I believe that they're conscious, and if I have a good reason to believe that they're not conscious, then I don't have a good reason to feel bad. So that's what I'm curious about.
So I agree with your intuition. Morality should, of course, be built on top of science to the degree possible. Now, the caveat there is that science is often wrong. The counter caveat is that science is really the only field we have that constantly knocks down its own walls. So this is to say, we should build morality on top of science. We shouldn't take science too seriously at any moment in time. But as the weight of the evidence accumulates, then I think it makes perfect sense to build on top of that. Now, that said, we don't know what it's like to be an animal. We just don't know. If I had a guess, obviously people used to think, I don't know, it's interesting to me just that everyone used to sort of think, oh, humans are conscious and animals are not. I think nowadays everyone thinks it's more of a gradient, which would make more sense. I mean, animal brains and our brains are so similar. It's quite striking if you look at dog brains or squirrel brains or horse brains or whatever. It's all the same stuff. You got, hippocampus and cerebellum and thalamus. It's all the same stuff. We just have slight differences. We've got much more cortex, the wrinkly outer bit. We have a much bigger prefrontal cortex, but certainly all the basic stuff that allows for suffering, you got in the other animals too. So I don't see any reason why there'd be any reason to say that they don't suffer. Actually, what's interesting is I'm kind of seeing Graziano's point here, which is that if that's all we have, that maybe they suffer, one could still make one's own decisions about, well, look, the way the cow is killed is they have a perfectly nice life eating grass on the hillside, and then suddenly their throat is slit and they don't know it. Maybe somebody could make the argument that it's not really suffering, and therefore they still want to eat the meat.
Well, let me ask you this. I don't want to make assumptions about your dietary practices, but assuming that you were of a mindset like mine where you don't want to eat animals if they are suffering, I would think we can agree that plants aren't suffering based on our knowledge of neuroscience and what it means to feel pain and suffer. So you'd probably be okay with eating plants. But then we would get to something quite rudimentary in the animal kingdom, like bivalves, so scallops, clams, this sort of thing. How would you approach the question of asking whether or not this animal is capable of suffering and whether or not you should eat it if you don't want to eat things that can suffer?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about a gradient, then what you're asking is, where do you draw the line in the sand on a gradient? And that's an impossible question to answer. The legal system is always coming up across these kinds of questions of, here's a smooth continuum. Just as an example, the development of the brain, there's no difference between someone who's 18 years old in one day versus someone who's 17 years old in 364 days. But one of them you can execute and one you can't, according to the Supreme Court. Does it make sense? No, but the legal system needs bright lines. What you're asking me is a bright line question of where would I draw the line, and I can't answer that with animals.
Do you think that there are, clues from research on human consciousness that could help us with this question? For instance, maybe we know from the NCC program that if you damage some part of the human brain, humans don't have conscious experience. Then you look at a scallop and you say, oh, it doesn't even have a brain. or this part of the brain for that matter. So
good question. But all the basic stuff about the limbic system and pain and reflex and whatever, we got to across the animal kingdom. You have, even in very, very simple organisms, ways of saying, oh, something noxious happened and I'm going to withdraw my gill and whatever. That's essentially the most basic machinery that you come with to the table as an animal to survive. So therefore, that makes it tough. And by the way, the reason I would hesitate to do that anyway, to take human consciousness as any sort of version of this, is because you can, look at humans. Let's say you say, okay, look, humans are intelligent, so we're not going to eat other intelligent animals. But what do you do when you have a child with Down syndrome? Do you say, okay, well, look, he's got a really low IQ, and so if we can eat, a cow, then we can eat this kid or something? I mean, I think using human intelligence as the metric is a dangerous place to go on that. Yeah.